Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I was in the kitchen stirring a pot of lentil soup when the doorbell rang. The aroma of garlic and cumin filled the air, warm and familiar, and I remember thinking how nice it would be to have someone over for dinner, someone who would actually appreciate the little things. The unexpected knock made me pause, wiping my hands on the faded towel that hung from the oven handle. I wasn't expecting anyone, and at my age minus 58, you learn to expect very little that surprises you anymore. When I opened the door, there stood Daniel, my best friend Karen's husband. He looked tired, eyes shadowed with something that wasn't quite sadness but wasn't far from it either. He held a bottle of red wine, the good kind, and smiled like he didn't know what else to do with his face. "Hey," he said. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I replied, stepping aside and letting him in. "Karen with you?" He shook his head, setting the wine down on my counter like it belonged there. "She's visiting her sister in Florida." I was nearby. Just didn't feel like going home yet. There was a hesitation in his voice that made me tilt my head. I'd known Daniel for over 20 years. He was dependable, polite, and quietly funny when you caught him in the right mood. But today there was something different. His presence lingered in the air like a song you can't place, but can't forget either. I poured us both a glass of wine, and we sat at the small wooden table in the corner of my kitchen. The soup bubbled gently behind us, forgotten for the moment. "You ever get tired of pretending everything's fine?" he asked, eyes not quite meeting mine. The question caught me off guard. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the lines near his mouth, the way his hands wrapped tightly around the glass, as though it were the only thing anchoring him to this moment. "I think everyone does," I said carefully. "Some of us just get better at pretending than others." He laughed softly, not out of amusement, but out of recognition. "Karen and I, we're not what we used to be." I nodded. I didn't need details. The truth was in the silence between his words. I'd seen the way they moved around each other lately, like dancers who had forgotten the steps but were still trying to finish the performance. We talked until the soup went cold, about life, aging, regrets neither of us wanted to say out loud. And it wasn't anything inappropriate, at least, not then. But the closeness, the quiet warmth, the way his voice softened when he said my name, it reached some part of me I thought had gone dormant long ago. When he finally stood to leave, I walked him to the door. The hallway was dimly lit, the kind of lighting that makes people linger in shadows, holding on to the moment before the night swallows it. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "You always made me feel seen, you know that?" he said, voice low, almost apologetic. Even when I didn't want to be. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, unsure of what to say. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Marie." But he didn't open the door. Not right away. He turned slowly, and for the first time in years, someone looked at me like I was more than just a friend, more than just Karen's reliable confidant, more than a woman who had settled quietly into her life. "I never said this before," he said, "but I always admired the way you carry yourself. Like life hasn't broken you, even when it tried." His words hung in a space between us like perfume. And in that moment, I felt beautiful, not because of how I looked, but because someone had finally noticed the parts of me I'd long since tucked away. He didn't kiss me. He didn't touch me. But the silence between us felt electric, and when he finally walked out, I closed the door gently behind him, standing there for a long moment with my hand still on the handle. The next morning, I found his scarf on the back of the chair. I didn't call to return it. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the sound of his voice, the way he'd looked at me. Karen texted once, said Florida was lovely, and she'd be back next week. I kept the conversation short, guilt curling in the edges of my chest, even though nothing had happened. But something had happened, and I knew it would change the way I saw him, and maybe even myself. A few nights later, just as I was about to turn in, I heard a knock at the door again. It was late, nearly 10 p.m. I stood in my robe, unsure whether to answer, heart suddenly loud in my chest. It was him again. I didn't know where else to go, he said. I let him in. He sat on the edge of the couch, silent, as though trying to find the right words. I sat beside him, hands clasped in my lap. "Do you ever wonder," he began, "what life would have been like if we met at a different time?" I looked at him, felt a chill run through me, not because it was cold, but because I had wondered the same. "I try not to," I replied. "But you do." "Yes." He turned to face me fully then, and the look in his eyes was not one of seduction but of longing. A longing to be known, to be heard, to be understood. We sat like that for what felt like hours, words not needed to fill the space. The only thing louder than the quiet was the tension humming gently between us. When he finally stood, I thought he was leaving again. But he didn't. "I just want someone to talk to." "Without pretending," he said. And I nodded. "You can always come here." That night, we didn't sleep together. We didn't even touch. But we sat until morning, talking about the things we never shared with anyone else. And in those conversations, I saw parts of him, and parts of myself I hadn't in years. In the days that followed, Daniel came by more often. Sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to sit. We didn't define what it was we were doing. We didn't have to. But something delicate and complicated was growing between us, and we both knew it. Then one evening, he arrived looking shaken. He stood at my door longer than usual before stepping in. "I told Karen I've been spending time with you," he said quietly. My heart paused. What did she say? "She asked if I was in love with you." "And what did you say?" He looked at me with a truth so bare it almost hurt. I said I didn't know, but I needed to find out. I stared at him, feeling everything, guilt, hope, fear, twisting inside me. Because I didn't know either. But maybe, just maybe, I wanted to find out too. The next few days blurred together like brushstrokes on a canvas I didn't know I was painting. Each moment felt tentative, like we were both walking a rope suspended between honesty and restraint. Daniel didn't come by right away after that night. I told myself it was for the best. Space was good. Space meant clarity. But the truth was, every evening without his knock at the door felt a little heavier. I found myself setting 2 places at the table out of habit. I noticed how quiet the house felt without the occasional low hum of his voice filling the corners. I'd never realized how used to his presence I'd become until he wasn't there. Then one afternoon, just as the sky started to bleed into gold and pink, my phone buzzed. "Can we talk? Tonight?" I didn't respond right away. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure what to type. But before doubt could harden into avoidance, I replied, "Yes, come by whenever you're ready." He arrived just after sunset, holding nothing this time, not wine, not excuses, not small talk, just himself. I led him to the back porch, where the air was still warm, and we sat beneath the string lights I'd hung years ago, but rarely turned on. Tonight, though, they flickered softly above us, as if sensing the moment. "I've been thinking," he began, voice low, careful, "about everything, about you, about what I want. And I realized I haven't been honest with myself, with Karen, with you. I waited, my hands folded around a mug that had long since gone cold. I've spent so much of my life doing what's expected. Staying. Enduring. Being loyal, even when the closeness was gone. He paused, swallowing hard. But with you, it's different. You see me. You always have. And for the first time in years, I feel alive. I didn't speak. My chest ached in that strange way where longing and fear meet and hold hands. He continued, I'm not asking you to make this easier for me. I know what's at stake, but I needed you to know how I feel. When I finally looked up at him, I didn't see Karen's husband. I saw a man unraveling and rebuilding all at once, and I saw myself, someone who had settled into the quiet rhythms of life and was now being asked to consider a different melody. I never expected this, I said, voice trembling. I never asked for it. I know. But I feel it too. The silence that followed was rich and full, not awkward, not unsure, just full, like the air before rain or the last breath before a song begins. He reached out then, not boldly, but gently, and placed his hand over mine. It was warm, steady, and his thumb moved just slightly across my skin. I don't know what happens next, he said, but I'd like to figure it out with you. The sound of cicadas filled the spaces between our words. Somewhere far off, a dog barked. Life continued as though nothing had changed, but something had. I didn't pull my hand away. We talked for hours that night, about the past, about our fears, about where the line had been, and when we'd crossed it. And though we didn't come to a decision, we both understood that something real was blooming between us, no matter how complicated or inconvenient. And then, just before he left, he kissed me. It wasn't hurried or impulsive. It was soft, searching, full of years and silence and possibility. When he pulled away, he looked into my eyes as though asking permission to hope. I nodded, just barely. In the following days, things changed between us, but not in the way I feared. We were careful, respectful, but we were also honest, and that honesty drew us closer. I told him I wouldn't be the reason his marriage ended, and he told me he'd already been living in the ruins for years. Eventually, Karen returned from Florida. I expected a knock at my door, a phone call, something, but it never came. Then one afternoon, Daniel called. I told her, he said. Everything. My breath caught. And she wasn't surprised. She said she knew something had shifted. She asked me to leave. And did you? Yes. I sat down, knees suddenly weak. I'm not calling to rush you into anything, he said gently. I just wanted you to know. I meant what I said. I want to figure this out with you, slowly, if that's what it takes. I remember staring out the window that day, watching the wind carry the leaves across the lawn. My whole life had been spent doing what was right, what was expected. And now, standing at the edge of something uncertain, something fragile, I had a choice. That evening, I set the table for two again. And this time, when the doorbell rang, I didn't hesitate. I opened the door, heart thudding, and saw him standing there, not just as Daniel, my best friend's husband, but as a man who had chosen me. As we sat down to eat, I realized how much courage it takes to pursue a truth that might cost you everything, but might also set you free. And I knew, deep down, that whatever came next, we'd face it together. Because sometimes the most unexpected connection is the one that teaches you how to live again. The days that followed weren't simple. Love, at our age, comes with history, Layers of choices, consequences, and people who've known us far too long to pretend things are clean. Daniel and I weren't swept up in youthful romance. There were no reckless declarations, no secret rendezvous. Instead, there were quiet breakfasts, long walks without needing to talk, and the silent weight of what we had both left behind. He moved into a small apartment not far from my place. It wasn't glamorous, just a modest one-bedroom with creaky floors and an old stove, but he said it felt more like home than the house he'd shared with Karen for decades. I believed him. The way he looked when he sat on his couch with a coffee in hand, relaxed for the first time in years, told me enough. But the world didn't stop spinning just because we had found something new. Word spread. It always does. First, it was the stares at the grocery store. Then came the phone calls, muted rings that stopped when I picked up. Eventually, an old friend asked me directly, "Did you really do that to Karen?" That question lingered in the air for days, like smoke that wouldn't clear. I hadn't done anything, not in the way they meant. There was no betrayal in the shadows, no secrets passed like notes in a crowded room. Still, it didn't matter. Perception always runs faster than truth. I found myself questioning everything. Was it worth it? The whispers, the tension, the friendships that seemed to thin out like old paper. At night, I'd lie awake beside Daniel and wonder if we built something too fragile to survive outside our little world. One evening, I came home to find a letter slipped beneath my door. It was from Karen. Her handwriting hadn't changed since college, looped and even, with a small heart she still used to dot her eyes. "Marie, I'm not angry anymore. I don't know what I expected from you. Maybe a phone call, maybe space. But I've had time to think, and I realized this didn't start with you. This started with Daniel and me years ago, when we stopped seeing each other, when we started pretending everything was fine. I won't lie and say it doesn't hurt. It does. But I'm not blind. I know what connection looks like. I saw the way he looked at you, even back then. I just chose to ignore it. I hope it was worth it. I hope you're happy. I really do. Karen." I read it over and over until the words blurred. Then I folded it carefully and tucked it into the back of a drawer, not out of guilt, but because it felt like the closing of a chapter that had already ended. When I told Daniel about it, he sat with the letter in his hands for a long time. "She's right," he said finally. "We stopped seeing each other a long time ago. I stayed because I thought that was loyalty. But loyalty without love isn't noble. It's just fear in disguise." His words were a kind of release. From that point forward, something shifted in me. I stopped apologizing to others, to myself, for choosing a life that felt alive. I started gardening again. I hosted dinners. I joined a small book club. And through it all, Daniel was there, not as a rescue, not as some prize, but as a partner, someone who held space for me to be exactly who I was without explanation. It wasn't perfect. We disagreed. Sometimes we fell quiet. But there was something sacred in the way we handled each other, with care, with patience, with a shared understanding that time was a gift, not a guarantee. Then one morning, as we sat on my porch watching the sun rise over the yard, he turned to me and said something I didn't expect. "I want to grow old with you." I laughed. "We're already old." "Then I want to keep doing it with you." It was the simplest promise, yet it meant everything. Because after all the years, all the endings, all the shifting tides, here we were, two people who had chosen each other when it would have been easier not to. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. Life didn't suddenly become a fairy tale. That's not how it works, especially not at 58. We still had bills, occasional aches in our joints, and mornings when we grumbled more than we spoke. But what we had, what grew between us, was something honest. Not flashy or flawless, but deeply rooted in mutual respect and hard-earned understanding. It was in the little things. Like how Daniel would always warm my coffee mug before pouring the first cup. Or how he learned to love the quiet jazz records I played while cooking. He started bringing home fresh flowers every Sunday, never roses, always something a little imperfect, like sunflowers or wild daisies. Flowers that looked like they belonged on my kitchen table. But there were hard moments, too. One afternoon, I ran into Karen. It was at the pharmacy, of all places. She was standing in front of the vitamins, her expression neutral until our eyes met. I froze, unsure of whether to speak or walk past, and pretend we were just two strangers in line for calcium supplements. She broke the silence first. "Hi, Marie." Her tone wasn't warm, but it wasn't sharp either. Just tired. "Hi," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by the scent of antiseptic and stale gum. "You look well," she said finally. "Thank you. You too." She nodded, then glanced down at her basket. "I heard you two are still together." I felt my throat tighten. "Yes." Another pause. "Well," she said, adjusting her purse strap, "I hope he's treating you better than he treated me at the end." That stung more than I expected. "He is," I said gently. But I never wanted things to happen the way they did. "I know." She looked at me then, really looked, and her eyes were sad, but clear. We both deserved something more. I just didn't expect it to come from the same place. And with that, she walked past me, out the door, and into the golden haze of the late afternoon. I stood there for a while, holding a bottle of aspirin I didn't really need, heart beating a little too loudly in my chest. When I got home, Daniel saw the look on my face and didn't ask questions. He just held me, arms wrapped around me in the quiet, and that was enough. Time passed. Seasons changed. Daniel moved in officially the following spring. We donated half his old furniture, painted the guest room a calming shade of green, and planted a small herb garden behind the house. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like home. One night, after a dinner with my daughter and her family, Daniel and I sat outside under the stars. He leaned back in the chair, sipping from a glass of wine, his eyes tracing the constellations like he could read something in them. "You think people our age still get happy endings?" he asked, turning toward me. "I think," I said, reaching for his hand, "we stop looking for endings altogether. We just start living the parts we used to skip over." He smiled, squeezing my fingers. "I like that." And I did too. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for a moment to define me. I wasn't chasing approval or clinging to what used to be. I was simply here, with someone who saw me, chose me, and stayed. Sometimes we still talked about the past, about regrets, about Karen, about how the road that brought us together was full of cracks and shadows. But it was also real. And real, I've learned, is the most beautiful kind of love. So now, when I wake up in the morning and feel the weight of his hand over mine, I don't question if this is where I'm meant to be. I know it is. Because some stories don't start with fireworks or grand confessions. They begin in kitchens, in shared silences, in lingering glances across rooms that used to feel empty. And they grow, slowly and surely, into something that still echoes long after the words are spoken.